It has been several months since Michael officially filed for divorce. Despite the fact that the process has not yet been completed, he already felt how the old ties with Jessica were gradually being broken. The hardest things for him were the moments associated with children. His children were not only the center of his world, but also a reminder of what had been destroyed. They saw him once a week, and each meeting was both a joy and an ordeal. With a new woman, a work colleague named Lisa, Michael felt the calm he had been missing for a long time. She understood him like no one else, was gentle, but at the same time strong and determined, helping him cope with the pain. Their relationship developed quickly, perhaps too quickly, but Michael sincerely believed that he deserved at least a small share of happiness after everything that had happened. Lisa was also a difficult woman. She knew that she was entering into a relationship with a man who carried the burden of the past, and at first it did not frighten her. However, the children complicated everything. She had never been married and had no children of her own, so the fact that Michael was a father of two was a new experience for her. One evening, sitting in her cozy apartment, where they spent most of their dates, Michael felt it was time to introduce her to the children. It seemed like a logical move, considering how far their relationship had come. But the inner anxiety did not go away.
Liz, I think we need to take the next step. It's time for you to meet the kids.
Lisa slowly put the cup of tea down on the table. She was looking at Michael intently, her eyebrows slightly knitted, as if she was trying to think over his words.
Are you sure they're ready for this? It may be difficult for them.
Michael looked down at his hands, feeling the tension tightening in his chest. He knew Lisa was right. The children had repeatedly expressed their dissatisfaction with the divorce, and although they loved spending time with him, any mention of Jessica or her mistakes caused a storm of emotions. However, they had to get used to the new life. Michael couldn't hide his new woman from them forever.
I know it's not going to be easy, but they have to understand that I have the right to be happy too. And besides, I want you to be a part of their lives. We are no longer at the first stage of our relationship. It's important to me.
Lisa thought about it again. She understood that Michael had made this decision a long time ago, but she was tormented by doubts. She always felt that his children could become a barrier between them, but she hoped that she could cope with it. She loved Michael, and that was the main thing for her.
If you're sure, then I'm ready to try it too. But Michael, I'm afraid they might not accept me.
Michael took her hand and squeezed it slightly, trying to convey to her at least a drop of confidence that he himself lacked.
They'll get used to it. It's just a matter of time. They need to understand that I'm not going back to their mother, and that you're not to blame for what happened. We will give them time, and they will understand that you are a good woman.
A few days later, that very day arrived. Michael invited the children to spend the evening at Lisa's. She cooked their favorite dishes, trying to create a comfortable and warm atmosphere. But as soon as they entered her apartment, tension hung in the air. His eldest son, Thomas, a 12-year-old boy with an inquisitive mind and heart, was skeptical from the very beginning. He didn't like the fact that his father had brought him to some strange woman's house. The youngest daughter, Lily, a 7-year-old girl, was a little softer, but she also felt uncomfortable.
Are you living with her now? May.
Michael felt something tighten inside him. He knew this conversation was going to be difficult, but he didn't even know how much. Lisa, who was standing next to him, smiled awkwardly, realizing that she was about to go through a cruel ordeal.
No, Tom. We don't live together. Lisa is my friend, and I want you to meet her. It's important to me.
Thomas crossed his arms over his chest, looking at Lisa with dislike.
You said we'd be spending time with you, not her.
Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It hurt him to see how his children reacted to Lisa. He knew this was a difficult moment for them, but he couldn't just give up on what he was building with her.
Tom, it's still our time. I just want you to know Lisa. She's a good person, and she supported me when it was hard.
Does Mom know we're here?
This question went straight to the heart. Michael knew that Jessica would not approve of this. She always avoided talking about Lisa, pretending that she didn't exist at all. But he couldn't hide his new life from his children forever.
Yes, Lil. Mom knows. This does not mean that something is wrong. It's just that our lives have changed.
Lisa, realizing that the situation was escalating, tried to defuse the situation.
Maybe you want to play a game or watch a movie? We have some great board games that I have prepared especially for you.
But her words remained in the void. Thomas ignored her and turned back to his father.
Why can't you just go back to your mom? You loved her. We were all family. And now we have to live like this.
These words pierced through Michael. He felt guilty in front of the children, in front of Jessica, and even in front of Lisa. But he had already made his choice. Everything had changed, and there was no turning back.
Tom, I know it's difficult, but Mom and I can't be together anymore. It doesn't mean that I love you less or that I don't want to spend time with you. It's just that life can be difficult. But I promise you that everything will be fine.
Thomas gave Lisa another dark look and abruptly turned around and went into another room. Lily followed him. Michael sighed heavily and sank into a chair. Lisa sat down next to him, lightly touching his arm.
I told you they wouldn't accept me that easily.
They just need time. They need to get used to the fact that things are different now. I promise they will understand.
Lisa smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. She began to doubt whether she could withstand this fight. But she decided not to tell Michael about it yet. They had already lost too much. It's been a few months since Michael left their lives. Jessica was still trying to come to terms with the idea that her marriage was really ruined, and it was her fault. It was getting harder at home. Every little thing reminded her of past mistakes, how she had betrayed Michael's trust and destroyed her family. But the hardest part was the conversation with the children, which she could not finish. With each passing day, Jessica felt that her life was becoming less manageable. The personal problems she was trying to carry began to affect her work. She could no longer make decisions with the same confidence, her efficiency decreased, and colleagues began to notice that something was going wrong. Until recently, Jessica was a respected specialist in her field, always collected and professional. But recent months have shown that even it is not made of iron. Monday morning began, like many others in recent weeks, with a tired look at the reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, an untidily tied hairstyle, all this clearly betrayed the inner storms that she was experiencing. There was an important meeting with a client to be held today, but Jessica felt completely unprepared. Her mind was not on getting ready for work, but on how to explain to the children why their father was no longer living with them. As she approached the office, she met her colleague, Laura, who had been increasingly trying to help her cope with the situation lately.
Jess, how are you? You look good today, a little tired.
Laura always knew how to choose soft words so as not to offend, but Jessica understood that behind this concern there was concern, and not baseless. In recent months, Jessica has noticed her colleagues looking askance in her direction. Several missed deadlines, missed meetings, and a lack of previous energy, all this could not go unnoticed.
I'm fine, Laura. Simply, I didn't get enough sleep. You know how it is.
Laura looked at her doubtfully, but decided not to push.
If you need anything, let me know. I'm here.
Jessica nodded gratefully and entered the office. But as soon as she was at her desk, she was surrounded by emptiness. She was looking at the documents, but she couldn't focus on any of them. My thoughts went back to the children, to Michael. What are they doing now? How are they going through the breakup? She had ruined their lives with her act. In the evenings, Thomas increasingly locked himself in his room, and Lily became more and more quiet and withdrawn. While she was thinking, she was caught by a call to the internal phone.
Hello.
It was her boss, Mr. Harrison, a man who always supported her career growth and believed in her potential. But in recent weeks, his calls have become alarming, which has added to Jessica's stress.
Jessica, come into my office as soon as you can. We need to discuss something important.
This call did not bode well. She felt her heart begin to beat faster. Meetings with Harrison never ended just like that, especially after so many failures on her part. When Jessica entered the boss's office, she saw his serious face. He pointed to the chair opposite and motioned for her to sit down.
Jessica, you know, I've always been your supporter. You've been doing a great job for many years, and we all appreciate your contribution here. But lately,
He paused, trying to find the words.
your work has been suffering lately. I see that you are out of shape, and this is reflected in the results. Several customers have already expressed dissatisfaction. What's going on, Jessica?
Jessica felt a wave of shame sweep over her. She knew he was right. Her personal life was destroying everything around her, including her career.
I know. I'm really sorry, Mr. Harrison. I've been having problems at home lately, and I'm trying to deal with them.
Mr. Harrison looked at her carefully. He wasn't the kind of boss who was easily sympathetic, but he wasn't soulless either. He knew that personal problems can undermine even the strongest people.
I understand that each of us has difficult times. But, Jessica, you have to understand your job is important. Customers are not waiting. If you can't handle the current workload, we'll have to review your responsibilities.
The boss's words hit her like a bolt from the blue. She couldn't afford to lose her job now. It was the only thing that still kept her afloat.
Please give me some more time. I'll try to fix it. I promise that I will get back in shape.
Mr. Harrison nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. He had already seen many employees who said similar things but couldn't handle the pressure. However, he was willing to give Jessica another chance.
Okay, I'll give you some more time. But if the situation does not improve in a month, we will be forced to reconsider your job responsibilities. I hope you understand that I'm saying this for a reason. You have potential, but now you have to concentrate.
Jessica thanked him for his understanding and left the office, feeling heavy at heart. No matter how hard she tried to hold on, her life was rapidly collapsing. Work has always been an island of stability for her, which helped her weather the storm. But now even this island was beginning to sink. On the way home, Jessica couldn't get rid of thoughts about the upcoming conversation with the children. She had been avoiding the subject of her father for the past few weeks, but she knew she couldn't go on like this anymore. The children should have known the truth. They felt that something was wrong, and her silence only increased their anxiety. That evening, after dinner, she called Thomas and Lily into the living room. They sat down on the couch, and Jessica realized that this was one of the most difficult moments in her life. She looked at their innocent faces and tried to find the right words.
Kids, I know you've noticed that Dad doesn't live with us anymore. I'm really sorry that I didn't talk to you sooner. Dad and I decided to break up.
Lily stared at her with her eyes wide open, and Thomas tensed. His face turned cold and unreadable.
Why? Don't you love him anymore?
The question hit Jessica hard. She still loved Michael, but her love was poisoned by betrayal. How can I explain this to a child?
I made a mistake. A big mistake that Dad couldn't forgive. But I love you both and I will always be there for you. We will remain a family, even if Dad lives separately now.
Lily clung to Jessica, sobbing. Thomas, on the other hand, remained motionless, his face expressing pent-up anger.
It's because of you that he left. You've ruined everything.
The words hit Jessica like a hammer. She knew she deserved this pain, but hearing it from her own son was unbearable.
Thomas, I understand that you are angry, but please believe me, I did everything I could to keep the family together. I understand if you don't want to talk to me right now, but I'm always here for you.
Thomas got up and, without saying another word, left the room, leaving Jessica and Lily alone. Jessica hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her tremble with tears. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep for a long time. Talking to the children turned out to be even more difficult than she could have imagined. But the most terrible thing was that she did not know how to continue to live with this pain and guilt. She had lost Michael, and now she had to fight not to lose her children. Jessica's relationship with James was one of those events that began brightly, but quickly began to fade under the pressure of circumstances. In the first months after their rapprochement, when the romance between them was just unfolding, Jessica believed that James would be the one for her to bring her back to life, fill the void that she felt in her marriage with Michael. He was so different, funny, unpredictable, passionate. She felt alive again in his company. But reality could not remain in the shadow of emotions for long. After her infidelity ruined her marriage, Jessica began to notice that her relationship with James was not as cloudless as she wanted to think. The problems began to manifest themselves gradually, but every day they became more and more obvious. James has always been a man who valued freedom. His career, which was successful and required constant travel, was an important part of his life, and he was not ready to sacrifice it for someone else. At first, Jessica tried to accept it. She understood that she could not demand constant attention from him because their relationship was the beginning of something new, unstable and fragile. However, after her world began to crumble, she began to look for stability in it, which she needed so much. But James wasn't the one who could give it to her. After her marriage finally fell apart and Michael filed for divorce, Jessica intuitively began to notice that James had changed. She increasingly felt coldness and aloofness on his part. At first, she blamed it on his busy schedule and stress at work, but every day it became more and more obvious that something had gone wrong. His calls became less frequent, and their meetings were short and tense. He was going on business trips more and more, and although he had always found time to write to her or call her before, now he found excuses more and more often. At first, Jessica tried to be patient. She believed that James was just overloaded with business, and maybe he needed a little time to sort out his feelings. However, her patience soon began to run out. Jessica began to realize that her own expectations of this relationship were very different from what James was willing to offer. She was looking for comfort and support, and he, on the contrary, tried to avoid any discussion of their future. The more she needed emotional intimacy, the more he pulled away. With each passing day, Jessica sank deeper into her thoughts and fears. She was thinking more and more that her relationship with James might have been just an illusion, a temporary infatuation that had lost its magic. She was aware that she had entered into this affair at a moment of weakness, when her life was full of chaos and pain. James had given her temporary relief, the opportunity to feel needed and desired again, but it wasn't enough to build something solid. Besides, James was feeling guilty. He knew that he was the catalyst for the destruction of Jessica's family, even if her marriage to Michael was already far from perfect. He couldn't ignore the fact that their relationship with Jessica had led to consequences that ruined the lives of not only Jessica and Michael, but also their children. James wasn't ready for this responsibility. He was increasingly asking himself the question, was this affair really the right decision, or had they both made a huge mistake? The more Jessica needed him, the more James felt the pressure. It seemed to him that their relationship had become too complicated, burdened with guilt and expectations that he could not satisfy. Instead of the lightness and passion that they had in the beginning, their relationship became like a heavy burden that he wanted to get rid of. He began to avoid meeting Jessica, inventing reasons not to see her. He was constantly on the move, and when he was in town, he preferred to spend time alone or with friends, avoiding her calls and texts. When they did see each other, he was withdrawn, expressed his feelings less and less often, and conversations became strained. Jessica could feel it, but she couldn't find the strength to ask him directly what was going on. Internally, Jessica struggled with contradictions. On the one hand, she knew she was losing James, but on the other hand, she didn't want to be alone again. She felt weak and vulnerable after destroying her family, and she was afraid of losing James as well. Her days were filled with anxiety and her nights with insomnia, as she replayed all the moments of their relationship in her head, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. Gradually, Jessica began to feel the accumulated fatigue. Her work suffered because of her constant reflections, the atmosphere at home was tense, and the children increasingly saw her sad and upset. Thomas and Lily also felt the changes in their mother. Their father was no longer a part of their daily lives, and it hit them hard, and now Jessica has become detached and depressed. The hardest thing for her was realizing that James might not see their future together. She began to notice how he avoided talking about joint plans. When she tried to discuss the future, he only answered evasively or turned the conversation to another topic. His attitude increasingly reminded her of how, in the last months of their marriage, Michael also avoided serious conversations. It was a sign she couldn't ignore. Over time, Jessica realized that her relationship with James had reached a certain critical point. She could no longer deny the obvious: he was moving away. It hurt, but deep down she knew that both of them were not ready for their relationship to grow into something more. Their romance had been a flash of passion at a time when they were both seeking solace, but now that passion was fading, leaving only emptiness and disappointment in its wake. Every day they spent apart from each other only increased her sense of loneliness. She tried to believe that James would return, that they would be able to establish a relationship, but all her attempts to get closer to him ran into a cold wall. She no longer felt like the kind of woman who could easily enjoy life with him. All that's left is uncertainty and fear of the future. Jessica began to realize that her relationship with James may never have been real. It was only a temporary infatuation that gave her the opportunity to escape from her problems, but now that reality has overtaken them both, they both were not ready to continue this further. James was too free-spirited and independent to take responsibility for her life and children. He wasn't the kind of man she could build a family with. Over time, Jessica began to come to terms with the fact that she might have to be alone again. This realization brought her pain, but also relief at the same time. She understood that her relationship with James would not be able to give her what she so longed for: stability, love and confidence in the future. She made a decision not to put pressure on him, to give him the opportunity to leave if he wanted to. There was already enough pain in her life to add another drama to it. Every day her thoughts about James became more distant. He was her temporary companion, but not someone who could help her through the real trials of life. She realized that her happiness and her future depended only on herself. And even though it wasn't easy to accept, she knew she needed to move on, even if it meant letting James go. After Jessica's passing, Michael could not find inner peace for a long time. His world turned upside down, and it seemed that everything that mattered began to collapse. The divorce, which was inevitable, turned out to be not only a legal process, but also a symbol that his family, which he had once relied on, no longer existed in the form he was used to. At first, he was immersed in a sense of betrayal and loss, which only got deeper every day. But as time went on, Michael gradually began to piece himself together, trying to bring at least some stability back into his life. For Michael, the most difficult thing was not just to cope with the loss of his wife, but to overcome the profound changes that had happened in his soul. He knew that he would never be able to trust anyone again the way he once trusted Jessica. Her betrayal came as a shock to him. Until the very last moment, he tried to find a rational explanation for what had happened, but nothing helped. Internal torments filled his days, and it seemed they would never go away. However, despite this, Michael knew that for the sake of his children he needed to move forward. Thomas and Lily became for him the only thread that connected him to reality and helped him not to drown in his own emotions. He felt a huge responsibility to them and tried to be as present in their lives as possible, despite the divorce. Every meeting with the children was like a ray of light in his dark reality. But in truth, even the children couldn't fill the void left by the breakup with Jessica. Over time, work became his only salvation. Michael plunged into business with his head, hoping that a busy schedule would help him take his mind off the pain. Daily meetings, projects, and responsibility to the team were all a way to escape from your own feelings. He began to spend more time in the office, often stayed late, and preferred to spend weekends at work instead of thinking about what he had lost. It was at this time that she appeared in his life, Caroline. She was his colleague, with whom Michael rarely crossed paths over the years. They worked in the same department, but until recently their communication was limited exclusively to business matters. Caroline was not the kind of person Michael could imagine himself in a relationship with. She was the exact opposite of Jessica: quiet, level-headed, immersed in her work, and seemed to be interested in nothing but her projects. But gradually their working contacts began to move beyond formal discussions. Michael began to notice that Caroline was always ready to support him, listen to him, or just help with any tasks. Her calmness and self-confidence turned out to be what Michael lacked so much. She didn't try to impose or interfere in his personal life, but every time they talked, Michael felt that her presence had a strange calming effect on him. Initially, their interaction was purely professional, but over time, work issues began to develop into informal conversations, then into lunches and late dinners after long working days. Michael began to realize that it was becoming easy for him to be around her. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he could be himself without hiding his feelings and worries. Caroline was careful and considerate. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't try to get into his personal space. It gave Michael a sense of freedom he hadn't felt since breaking up with Jessica. Gradually, their meetings began to happen more often, and Michael realized that he was attracted to her not only because she helped him forget about the past, but also because he began to have real feelings for her. Unlike his previous relationship with Jessica, where everything was saturated with emotion, drama, and constant tension, his relationship with Caroline was completely different. There was no need to fight for attention or prove anything. Everything happened naturally and without coercion. She didn't demand anything from him except that he be honest with himself. And Michael began to realize that this was exactly what he had been missing all this time. Nevertheless, Michael did not allow himself to delve into these new feelings for a long time. The pain of Jessica's betrayal still lived inside him, and he was afraid to trust anyone again. The fear of being cheated on again haunted him, and every time he started thinking about starting a new relationship with Caroline, something clicked inside him, reminding him of the past. However, despite this, their relationship continued to develop. At some point, Michael realized that Caroline had become more than just a colleague or friend for him. She became the person who helped him regain faith in himself. She supported him in difficult moments, helped him find solutions where he saw only problems. In her presence, Michael began to feel like a man again, who was able not only to cope with difficulties, but also to enjoy life. They started spending more and more time together. Spontaneous dinners after work have become commonplace. Gradually, these meetings became less formal, and Michael realized that their conversations were moving beyond business discussions and personal problems. Caroline was an attentive listener, but she also knew how to share her thoughts and views on life, which often coincided with his own. It was amazing for Michael, because they were so different that he could never have imagined that something more would arise between them. Nevertheless, Michael did not rush things. He was careful not to make the same mistakes. He realized that when entering into a new relationship, you need to be honest with yourself and your partner. He could no longer afford the naivety with which he approached his relationship with Jessica. Now he was ready for the fact that life could bring new challenges, and that he needed to be prepared for them. One day, after spending an evening with Caroline talking about life, he realized that he was ready. "I'm ready to put the past behind me and start over with a clean slate." It wasn't a decision made in a moment, but a slow and conscious realization that he couldn't live in the past forever. Yes, his marriage to Jessica was an important part of his life, but it's over and it's time to move on. Caroline was the person who helped him believe in the possibility of happiness again. She wasn't Jessica, she wasn't trying to replace her or play the same role in his life. She was completely different, calm, balanced, confident in herself and her decisions. And it was her independence, her inner strength, that attracted Michael the most. Gradually, their relationship moved to a new level. Michael was aware that these feelings he had for Caroline were more than just gratitude for the support in difficult moments. These were real feelings that he hadn't felt in a long time. But despite this, there were still fears inside him. The fear of being betrayed again, the fear that he might make a mistake in a person, as happened with Jessica. However, every day he spent with Caroline convinced him that she was different. She demanded nothing from him but honesty and sincerity, and that was what Michael appreciated the most. However, Michael still hesitating to take the first step. He was afraid that if he allowed himself to fall in love again, he would lose everything he had just started to rebuild again. But one day he realized that life was too short to be afraid. He has already lost a lot, and now it's time to find himself again. Michael knew that this new phase of life would not be easy. His children were not yet ready to accept a new woman in his life, and he understood that he would have to face their resistance. But despite that, he was willing to try. He knew that he could no longer live in the shadow of the past. He needed to move forward, and Caroline was the person he wanted to take that step with. For a long time, Jessica could not come to terms with the consequences of her action. What at first seemed to her a flash of passion, a moment of weakness that could have been left in the past, led to the destruction of her family. She lost not only her husband, but also her inner self-confidence. Every day it became harder for her to accept the reality that her family life would not return to its former course. At first, Jessica was just trying to get through the pain. She hoped that time would be able to heal her wounds, and life would somehow get better by itself. But alas, the situation was only getting worse every day. Her children, who at first tried to accept divorce as inevitable, began to distance themselves from her more and more. Thomas, the eldest son, became increasingly withdrawn and sullen, avoiding contact with his mother. Lily, although she was more gentle by nature, also began to show signs of anxiety and isolation. Jessica felt that she was losing not only her husband, but also her children, and this was unbearable for her. The job that had previously served as her salvation from family problems was now also becoming an unbearable burden. Jessica couldn't handle the tasks the way she used to. Her attention wandered more and more often, and colleagues began to notice her constant distraction. She felt that her world was slowly collapsing, and she could no longer maintain a balance between her professional and personal life. One day, looking at herself in the mirror, Jessica realized that she could no longer live like this. She saw before her a haggard woman who had lost control of her own life. It was obvious that time alone would not heal her, and she had to start acting. Jessica decided that she needed to try to rebuild her family, despite all the destruction she had caused. Her first thought was to seek professional help. Therapy had always seemed unnecessary to her, but now she realized that she couldn't cope without it. She began attending one-on-one sessions with a psychologist who helped her sort out her feelings and understand the reasons for her behavior. For the first time in a long time, Jessica began to realize that her cheating was the result of accumulated problems in her relationship with Michael, problems that they had ignored for many years. The realization was painful, but liberating. She began to see her mistakes, not only in the moment of betrayal, but also in the way she behaved in marriage before that. With each therapy session, Jessica became more and more aware that her desire to rebuild her family was not only related to guilt. She really loved Michael and wanted to try to restore their relationship, to regain his trust. But it wasn't easy to do it. Jessica knew that she had destroyed not only his trust, but the very foundation of their marriage, and now she had to prove to him that she was capable of changing. The first step towards this was to reconnect with the children. Jessica began spending more time with Thomas and Lily, trying to regain their trust and intimacy. She realized that her emotional detachment after the divorce only made the situation worse. The children needed a mother who would be a support for them, but instead they saw a woman immersed in her problems and guilt. Jessica started with simple things: communicate more with children, listen to them, and be interested in their feelings. She organized joint trips to the park, dinners and family evenings, trying to create new, positive memories. Gradually, her efforts began to bear fruit. Lily, who was more receptive to emotional support, began to open up, talk about her experiences and feelings. Thomas, on the other hand, remained more closed and distrustful, but even he began to show signs of softening over time. Despite the success with the children, the relationship with Michael remained strained. He was no longer the man with whom she had once shared all her thoughts and dreams. Their meetings were brief and formal, limited to discussing children and organizing their upbringing. Every time she saw him, her heart ached. Michael was not just a husband to her, he was her best friend, the man with whom she had shared her life for many years. Now there was a wall between them, and she didn't know how to break it down. Jessica was aware that it would not be easy to regain his trust. He was badly hurt by her betrayal, and it wasn't a wound that heals quickly. Nevertheless, she did not lose hope. Her therapist helped her understand that it takes actions as well as words to restore trust. Jessica began to actively work on herself. She learned to manage her emotions and began to have more honest and open conversations with Michael when they had the opportunity to talk. She wanted him to see that she had changed, that she was ready to fight for their family. However, all these efforts, despite their importance to her, did not always produce quick results. Michael remained cold and distant. Jessica understood that he had already begun to build a new life without her, and this was the most painful thing for her. She knew that another woman had appeared in his life, and although she tried not to think about it, this thought haunted her all the time. Jessica couldn't accept that Michael could fall in love with someone else again, but she also understood that she had no right to demand that he return. However, she decided not to give up. Jessica began to develop an action plan to bring the family back. She offered Michael joint meetings with the children, trying to show that they can still function as a family. Each such meeting was a test for her, because Michael remained emotionally distanced and his looks and gestures indicated that he was not ready to get close to her again. But for Jessica, it was a chance, even a small one, to prove that she could change. The hardest part was admitting to herself that perhaps her efforts would not produce the desired result. Michael might not forgive her, even if she did her best. This thought often tormented her at night when she was alone with herself. But despite this, she continued to struggle. Jessica understood that her own happiness could no longer depend on Michael. She had to get herself back first and foremost for herself and for her children. At that moment, Jessica realized that therapy was not just a way to get Michael back. She was a way to get herself back, she realized that over the years, her self-esteem and happiness depended on how others perceived her, especially Michael. But now she realized that her inner balance depends only on herself. She began to learn to accept herself, forgive herself for her mistakes, and move forward. Every day was a new battle for her. She no longer saw life in pink tones, as she once did at the beginning of her marriage, but she was also no longer the kind of woman who allowed herself to sink under the pressure of circumstances. Now she had a goal, not just to bring her family back, but also to find herself in this new world where everything she knew had collapsed. Over time, her relationship with her children began to improve. Thomas, although still introverted, began spending more time with her. Lily began to trust her with her secrets and worries again. These small successes gave Jessica the strength to move on. She knew that her children needed her, and she was ready to keep fighting for them. Michael remained a mystery. Jessica didn't know if he would ever be able to trust her again. But now she was ready to accept any outcome. She realized that sometimes love is not only a struggle for another person, but also the ability to let him go if it is necessary for his happiness. This is the moment that Michael and Jessica have been dreading for a long time, the moment when they need to make a final decision. Their entire history has led to this point: pain, betrayal, attempts to fix the past, memories of who they were and what became of them. They had a choice: either to sever all ties completely, or try again, risking repeating old mistakes. For Michael, this choice was especially painful. He understood that his whole life had changed. Jessica had once been everything to him: love, support, the mother of his children. But betrayal ruined everything. And even after months of trying to put his life back together, when there was a chance for a new relationship with Caroline, Jessica's shadow still hung over him. It was hard to accept that the person he shared his life with could betray him, but it was even harder to realize that maybe he still hadn't let her go to the end. Michael knew Caroline was different. Her calmness, maturity, tenderness, all this was what helped him survive after the divorce. She did not demand immediate decision-making from him, did not press him, did not accuse him of still not being free from the past. But he knew that sooner or later he would have to make a choice: continue the relationship with her, or take a chance and try to rebuild a family with Jessica. On the other hand, Jessica also faced a difficult decision. Her therapy has helped her understand a lot about herself. She was no longer the woman who cheated on Michael, trying to fill an inner void. She's changed. Every day she spent alone, every hour she tried to reconnect with her children, taught her a lot. She began to see the world in a different way. She now understood that her actions had ruined their marriage, and although she sincerely regretted what had happened, she realized that she could not change the past. All she had left was the future, and the question was what that future would be. Despite her determination and self-improvement, Jessica couldn't help but have doubts. She wanted Michael back to rebuild her family, but what if that wasn't possible? What if he could never trust her again? Was she ready to live with it? Her children began to get closer to her again, but that was only part of the picture. Would it be better for them if they lived together as a family again? Or should she let Michael move on and build a new life with another woman? Michael had been trying to avoid talking to Jessica about the future for a long time. He delayed this moment by hiding behind caring for the children, immersing himself in work, or finding solace in communicating with Caroline. But all this time, his soul was torn apart by contradictions. On the one hand, he was grateful to Caroline for her patience and support. She was the one who helped him find balance during a period when his life was in chaos. But on the other hand, Jessica remained a part of his past that he couldn't just erase. He knew that she had changed, saw her efforts to regain trust and restore relations with her children. She had come a long way, and Michael knew it. However, was it enough? Could he really trust her again? All of Jessica's attempts to win him back seemed sincere, but the fear of repeated betrayal lived deep inside him. He couldn't just forget what it felt like to be cheated and betrayed. His mind and heart were arguing with each other. Reason said that people did not change, that Jessica had betrayed once and could betray again. But his heart still held memories of the woman he had once loved, the woman with whom he had built a family and whom he might still love. Caroline, despite her self-control, also understood that their relationship was at a crossroads. She could see that Michael was still not completely free of the past. He was with her physically, but emotionally not always. She never pressed him, knowing that it would take time, but her patience could not be endless. Caroline didn't want to become the kind of woman who waits for her partner to make a final decision. She knew that she deserved more a man who would be with her completely, without a shadow of the past. Every time Michael was left alone with his thoughts, the question arose in front of him, is it worth giving Jessica another chance? Or is it better to leave everything in the past and try to build a new life with Caroline? It wasn't an easy choice. He knew that his decision would affect everyone, at himself, at Jessica, at the children, at Caroline. He felt responsible for everyone who was involved in this drama, and it weighed on him with great force. Michael started spending more time with the children, trying to figure out what would be best for them. Thomas and Lily were the most important things in his life, and their well-being came first. He noticed that after all Jessica's efforts, the relationship between her and the children began to improve. Lily began to smile again and share her feelings with her mother, and Thomas, although he remained withdrawn, was no longer so hostile to his mother. This gave Michael hope that perhaps the family could really be restored. But there were other aspects that bothered him. He couldn't ignore the fact that Caroline had become an important part of his life. Their relationship was different, calmer, more mature, based on mutual respect. Caroline didn't demand an immediate decision from him, but Michael knew he couldn't leave her in limbo forever. She deserved honesty, and he had to give her an answer. Michael spent many weeks thinking, weighing the pros and cons. He knew that any decision would be difficult and painful. If he decides to try to get back in touch with Jessica, he will have to go through a long way to restore trust, which in itself did not guarantee success. But if he decides to put everything in the past and continue his life with Caroline, it will also be a difficult decision, because he will have to finally let go of the past, which he has not been able to do so far. Jessica was also in a state of constant expectation at this time. She didn't know what decision Michael would make, but she was already prepared for any outcome. Her self-improvement and therapy helped her realize that her life should not depend on another person's decision. She was ready to accept his choice, whatever it was. Yes, she hoped for the restoration of the family, but she also understood that Michael could have gone the other way, and she should be ready for this. Finally, the moment of truth has arrived. Michael, after spending a lot of time thinking, made his choice. It was not an impulsive decision, but a conscious and balanced one. He realized that his future could not be built on fears and doubts. Whatever decision he made, it had to be based on honesty and willingness to face new challenges. His choice was the result of a long journey that all the participants in this drama have gone through.